Hello again. Sorry about that. The battery just stopped. So I'm picking it up again just for another 5 minutes or so. So sorry about that. Technical difficulties, and I know you're videoed out and you're probably zoomed out too. So bear with me for a bit. Okay, so we were talking about the evidence-based practices that are listed. And I want to get through the last few of these just so you have a little bit of an explanation of them and also how you integrate those into your paper successfully. So the next one is family psychoeducation. So this has been tested against other types of interventions with family and come as an evidence-based practice that it works. And you guys did a great job in that chapter of thinking through the family psychoeducation. So if you want to use this with your client, you can go right back to the book and it shows exactly what is included in a family psychoeducation, intervention. So that's what I mean. These are the best practices, evidence-based practices. You go right to your book and it'll show you those. Again, I'm going to caution you, even though I don't think I need to, that be careful of your terms. If you have a client who's living with a family member and you think they need to have some intervention to help sort this out and stop the fighting, and if the client wants to move out, probably your first intervention is going to be something like this. Let's everybody help understand what this illness is about and make a plan and be part of the successful outcomes. That's family psychoeducation. That's not family therapy. So again, every time you use that word therapy, or don't use it, be careful because it may mean something else. So for this paper, for this purposes, be sure to use the correct terms. And again, remember, another thing to sort of remember is that your client is your client. If you're the care coordinator for your client and it's Eric or it's Andrew, you're going to do what you can to help the family cope, but please do remember that the client is your client. So if the family member is really struggling with this, you're better off giving them a referral, helping them get to NAMI, where they'll have all the supports that they need and people who are peer-to-peer supports for them. So kind of keep that in mind, because sometimes it's easy to lose the client when you're talking about a whole family. And for the purposes of this, your client is the client that you've chosen. And you help the family if it helps the client. The next one as evidence-based practice, and it's really, I'm delighted that now this is listed in there, is vocational work for these clients. Not just any vocational work, but individualized supported employment. So you know, and you're getting this in the chapter, what this doesn't necessarily mean full-time competitive employment. It's work. And I would say, if I would have one intervention that I found that has really changed a client from just living and surviving to making that jump into a life worth living, it's vocational work. Having a job, having work means so much to a client. Even though there's all those obstacles, the book lists all these obstacles, but there's huge benefits to this. And they come in the form of a client learning to see themselves again as a whole person that's part of the world. So it's just a gift you can give to clients by helping them succeed in some kind of vocational. I mean, it helps in things like grooming. Did anybody have a client who says, I would like help in my hygiene? Don't think so, right? But if you see that the client needs help in hygiene, here's your way to it. So you use these interventions as a way to get to other common goals. So one of those is vocational. When a client gets a job, they have a reason to groom. They have a reason to be in a routine, to get up in the morning, to learn to take their medications at the right time of day. All those pieces, to stay sober. Many of my interventions with clients that help them get sober, if you have really integrated dual diagnosis, which is the evidence-based practice, is to integrate that treatment. So a client will often, understand the need for sobriety and to getting a handle on their substance abuse when it comes to work. And the more natural supports you have for that, the better. An employer will fire someone if they come in drunk. Now, me as the good-meaning social worker can scold that client for being drunk all I want, but if the employer says, hey, you can't come into this job being hungover or drunk, I'll give you one more chance. And believe me, the client wants that job. They have a reason now to get sober, a reason to reduce their amount of consumption. So that's how these goals, when used properly, these interventions, they work together to all help a client function better. So just remember that with employment, that we don't necessarily are talking about full-time competitive employment. We're not talking about being a science rocket engineer. But maybe there's a successive approximation. Maybe instead of that client being a full-on butcher, maybe they can help out and get a volunteer job and then a part-time job in a butcher shop. The plus for all these is that when that client goes home to their family for a barbecue and somebody says, how was your week? They say, I went to work. And I'm telling you, that is a very, very engaging piece for a client, is to feel like they have a role, to feel like they're back in the mainstream of the world. And sometimes it's a matter of just respect, that a family member will give a client respect for going to work that they're not going to get otherwise. So again, it's a powerful, powerful intervention when it's used as an individualized strategy and a niche placement. And that's, means really coming up for the perfect work that helps this client and supporting that in any way you can, as in your own counseling or as a vocational counselor, to support them and make this be a successful experience for them. Really worth your while. Again, one of these pieces that I sure wish we could talk about a lot more in class, because a lot more examples of how these things look in real life, but sorry about that. Okay, so housing. So the chapter's pretty clear about the best practice is supported housing, and that means a person's in their own place in permanent housing that they don't have to graduate from, and they are it's very individuals, and the supports comes to them. So there are a lot of models where somebody goes from congregate living to a group home to another setting, and then finally graduate to their own apartment. But what the evidence says is that that doesn't work as well as somebody being supported in the housing of their choice. Now, not all clients obviously can do that, and sometimes they do need to start at a different place, and you can take your client through those steps if you'd like. But if a client is saying they want to live on their own, supportive housing is the way to go. We talked a little bit about integrated dual diagnosis. So just know that, and this might be one of those mistakes that you make in a paper. You say the client is drinking, I sent them to AA. What do we know about sobriety and abstinence from the textbook and probably from your personal experience across the board with any types of clients? And insisting on sobriety and abstinent and insight, it seems like a good goal for you as a clinician, but it doesn't work. So with these clients, we're talking about a harm reduction model, and we're definitely talking about it being integrated into the rest of their treatment. So you as the counselor, don't necessarily say, I referred them out to AA. That would be a parallel system that you're putting a client through. So you as a counselor are going to help them through those very same issues, and it's going to be part of your treatment. All the things that you've learned in other classes, in the substance abuse classes, like motivational interviewing, that's all right down this road. So I don't think there's anything super new for you to that, but it is one way that people make a mistake in this paper and then learn, is because I've had people say, I sent them to AA, and then turns out it didn't work. So then that's when they make an adjustment to the treatment plan and say, oh, this wasn't tailor-made for this client. Turns out when they went to AA, they were very anxious because everybody around them looked real normal and they felt awkward, or people shunned them because they weren't as nicely dressed. I sent them to an AA where people are worried about losing their cars and their big fancy jobs and their marriages, and this client had no way to relate because they don't have a car, they don't have a fancy marriage, and they don't have a fancy job. So that's one way a mistake is made in a paper like this, and then you say, oh, I get it, then we need to integrate the treatment and maybe do that one-to-one, or maybe find a group, a double trudgers group that fits more for this client, or maybe they don't fit in a group at all. And I tell you, it still does happen in the real world, if you can believe it or not, that clients go to AA and it ends up being such a terrible experience. They get shunned, but also somebody tells them, don't take your medications. Honestly, it still happens, even now at this age. It's one thing if they're telling them not to take anti-anxiety medications like Valium, but when it comes to Clozaril, you just don't want to be telling a client maybe you should be off those and going a nutritional way or something. So be real careful about how you use AA and more standardized treatment. When you're referring to a client to something, you really need to check out what the messages they're going to get, or it's going to backfire. That's why what works is integrated. And the last one is you saw this week on the consumer movement how powerful it is to add peer-to-peer support to your program. And it's funny because it's taken a while for this to come into fruition, because not from the client's perspective, but from the clinician's perspective. There's a lot of clinicians who don't really want to sort of take that step back and say, oh, we sure I'm the kind of the expert, that said, something's not working in my treatment. Maybe we pull in somebody who's a peer and talk to them in a way that you can't, as a clinician, know. You don't have the lived experience. So it's humbling, really, to see how effective adding a peer-to-peer support can be. Now, some of these can also be for functional things. They use peer supports for helping take people to appointments or stand next to them in line in the stupid Rite Aid, so that they don't feel stigmatized. To ride the bus with somebody so that they get comfortable with it and learn skills. So there's the learning the skills piece, but there's, a very profound piece of, I was in that hospital too, and I know what it's like to be hospitalized against my will. And if you take some of your medications, you might be able to prevent that. How about if we meet every week and let's hash it out? So it's a powerful intervention. I'm glad it's now considered an evidence-based practice. So these are what you're going to look back at the end of your paper and sort of say, did I get as many of these in as I can? What was my rationale for using this intervention versus that? So just, to remember that the point is not to cure the client or have the best, show all the perfect interventions. The point is to show what, a realistic depiction of what a client's life might go through in a year in treatment. What kind of obstacles they'll have, struggles, interventions, and what you as a clinician do to make adjustments to your treatment plan. Because you might want to take another look at the syllabus where it's the course learning objectives. One of the objectives is to assess this, do treatment planning, and showing that you can adjust your treatment planning to the clients. So that's what this is about. So hopefully this paper is not overly taxing. You can even have fun with it. You could take this client through the year in whatever way you want. You could be very creative, and you can take the intervention straight from the book, so no need for outside research of any kind. So, you know, really it's you showing your critical thinking, showing the material in the book. And it can, you know, and it can be fun. And remember, these aren't real clients. You can do whatever you want with them. It's all to demonstrate the material in the course. So hope that helps. Hope that helps figure some of this out. And again, sure wish we could have had this discussion in person so that I could have the questions answered and give you a better feel for what this work is like and what these clients are like. But you know, I gotta say, from what I've been reading in your discussions, I'm pretty impressed that you're getting a lot of this straight from the book and are thinking these things through, and lots of great comments and insights. So thank you for that, and I'm sure the papers will be that way. Don't worry. And again, home stretch, right? We're just about done with this crazy quarter. Take care.